here at Rutgers Cooperative Extension. My name is Rachel Tansey, and I am here with FCHS in Monmouth County, and I'll serve as your host today. I'm so very excited to present this program with Jen here on Heart Health Basics, certainly a topic we can all benefit from, especially during Heart Month. But before we move on, I just wanted to go over a few webinar logistics. First, this webinar is being recorded, and as participants, all of your videos and microphones have been turned off. And if you have any questions, please post them in the Q&A box, or if you wanted to through the chat. We will have time at the end of the presentation to field those questions. Also, just to quickly review the structure of Rutgers Cooperative Extension, for those of you who are not familiar, Rutgers Cooperative Extension is an affirmative action equal opportunity employer, and we have a partnership between the Board of County Commissioners, Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey, and the USDA's National Institute of Food and Agriculture. We have faculty and or staff in all of the 21 counties here in New Jersey, and of our department, we have 3 subcategories of departments in cooperative extension of Rutgers Cooperative Extension, with agriculture and natural resources, which also comprises of the marine sciences department, the 4-H youth development department, and then our department of family and community health sciences, or FCHS. FCHS provides outreach in nutrition and wellness and all related resources and topics there within: food safety, chronic disease prevention, etc. We have a lot you can find on our website, and do hope you'll join us and check that out there. So now I'll introduce our presenter, Jen Shikaitis. Jen is a faculty member here with the Department of Family and Community Health Sciences at Rutgers University, where she's been since 2012. During her time, she's implemented programs in nutrition and wellness to audiences ranging in age from preschool to older adults. And she's also partnered with many, including the New Jersey Department of Agriculture, several schools, and nonprofits to implement farm-to-school programming throughout New Jersey. So without further ado, I'll sign things over to you, Jen.
Thank you so much, Rachel, and good afternoon, everybody. It's very nice to be here. I appreciate you joining me on this afternoon, especially now that the sun's out. I know it might be a little tempting to, hope it's a little tempting to get outside and enjoy that sun, which we have not seen very much of recently. So thank you for being here. I am very glad to be talking about this topic, especially during Heart Health Month, which is February. I wanted to just take this opportunity to go over just some general information about our hearts and how to keep them healthy, and also some of the causes of some heart disease. And so I'm going to get started. Just a couple quick things though first. I'm sorry, I am battling a little cold, so if I'm clearing my throat or take some breaks to drink some water, just bear with me. And then secondly, I am at home today. My kids are also home. They are old enough to entertain themselves. Just in case, though, on the off chance there's any interruption, I just ask that you have patience for a moment while I deal with that, and then I'll be right back. So thank you. All right, so let's get started. So I wanted to start off by just acknowledging and talking about some of the health trends that we have seen in the US in the past several years. I'm assuming that you have at least heard about some of these trends, if not read up on them a little more extensively. In short, the news is not great. You know, Americans are not in great health these past several years. These are just some examples of some headlines that sort of highlight the state of our health in this country. And you'll see some trends here. You'll see obesity, you see diabetes, you see you know, the types of foods that we tend to eat a lot of. And so this is something that, you know, is affecting our health in many ways, including our heart health. And I will talk a little bit more in depth about these trends and what they mean. But just to draw your attention, this is something that we're seeing more and more of. There has, you know, in recent years, you know, there was a huge spike, and we're seeing somewhat of a leveling off, but the news still isn't great. We're still seeing really much larger numbers than we should of various lifestyle-related diseases: obesity, diabetes, heart disease, etc. I wanted to also just point out this this map. So if you're looking, obviously you recognize this map. It's a map of the US. And at the top there, you'll see above each map that they represent various years. So the first one there's 1991. And if you look at the bottom there, you'll see that the color that the states are shaded indicates the rates of obesity among adults living in that state in those years. Okay, so you'll see from 1991 through 2010, there is a really, really significant shift in those colors, which indicates a significant shift in the health status, in the status of the rate of adults who have been diagnosed in that obese category in that state. So you'll see, for example, in excuse me, in Colorado in 1991, it's less than 10. And then by, in the years 2008 to 2010, it climbs up to like the 15% category. So it has a significant increase in the number of adults who've been diagnosed as being in the obese category. Why are we concerned about this? Well, obesity is related to heart disease. Adults experiencing obesity are at greater risk of also experiencing some sort of heart disease. So this is why we're calling our attention to this, and we're seeing these trends, and we're not really seeing much improvement, if any, in recent years either. I know this is a little bit, the last map we're seeing here is from 2010, but the numbers really have not improved, so we're still seeing numbers similar to this. Okay. Children also, we're seeing an increase in or a change in their health status of children as well. So you'll see that at the beginning of this graph, that's the years 1971 to 1974, which is sort of like the beginning of a significant change that we started to see, a few decades ago in the health status of Americans, adults, including children. And so you'll see that by the end of the graph here, at the end of that line, there is a slight difference between, the boys and girls, but not much. And so we see that the obesity rate has also significantly increased among children as well. It's not just adults and children. It's up to that, 20% category. Adults now, it's around 40% that we're seeing being diagnosed in the obese category. So we're all being affected by these health trends. And so we're going to look at some reasons, some things that are contributing to these trends. Okay, there are multiple causes. It's not just one. If it were one, it might be a problem that's a little easier to address, or to say, oh, we just have to change this one thing and then it'll be better. But that's not the case, right? These things are often what we call wicked problems or complex problems. They have multiple causes, including our lifestyle, our environment, and also our genes. So these kind of three causes all interact to kind of create a perfect storm and cause these issues that we're seeing. What we're seeing in the past several years, and you remember that one graph that I showed you was 1974 or 1971 to the present, and then the maps that I showed you of the US started in 1991. So the past few decades, what we are seeing more and more of is that we are seeing an intake of calories that is equal or greater to what we have consumed, but also we're seeing a decrease in our physical activity. And this causes an imbalance, right? That causes more calories to be consumed due to larger food portions and sizes, which have increased in the past several years. We also, as Americans, are eating out a lot more often than we used to. And that's eating out in not just fast food, but regular restaurants, non-fast food restaurants as well, which, when the meals that we see from restaurants, not just fast food, are very frequently, much more likely to be higher in fat, sodium, and calories than the meals that we eat at home. Also, we tend to consume fewer vegetables and plant-based foods when we're out at restaurants than we do at home. We're also seeing a significant increase in the amount of sugar that we're eating, that we're consuming. The greatest source of this sugar is soft drinks. So sodas, iced teas, flavored fruit drinks, things like that. The intake of these types of drinks since the 1970s has increased by like 120% or something. I forget the exact percent, but it's something like that. And this is the greatest source of what we call empty calorie intake or sugar intake, where we're intaking extra calories, but not a lot of other important nutrients that our bodies need. Okay. We are also not nearly as physically active as we used to be in the years prior to like 1970-ish. Okay, past several decades. The economy has switched to a more service-based economy. We're using computers and technology a lot more than we used to, which in some ways is a very good thing, right? But in other ways, it means that we are not needed to do the things that machines are doing for us nearly as much anymore either. Increase in screen time, not just with TV, but also sitting in our computers, right? There are so many more occupations these days that we see that just require you to kind of be at your desk all day and not really to move around or be physically active at all. Even like, often I will get an email from a colleague who works like down the hall from me, where it's very easy to get up and just walk down the hall and talk to the person, but we've gotten so used to just that electronic communication that that's become the norm. We don't even question it anymore. And so we just aren't moving nearly as much as we used to. So we're seeing this increase in calorie intake and a decrease in physical activity. And it's creating this big imbalance where it's leading to more people getting up into that obese category, which in turn is then causing several health problems, including heart health problems. Portion distortion, I wanted to just kind of briefly highlight this as an issue. I could talk for probably an hour about this issue alone. In fact, I do have a presentation that I give on portion distortion. I'm just going to spend a minute or two here just to bring your awareness to it. But portion distortion is basically the concept of, the fact that we have a distorted idea of what a normal portion or is that we should be eating, right? And so because of that, we tend to consume many more calories than we need, without intending to, or without even realizing it. Excuse me. And these are some good examples, right? We're just seeing larger and larger portion sizes in all areas of life. So you'll see on your screen there, the first example that I have is a cheeseburger. Okay. Years ago, right, the size of a cheeseburger used to be, I think it was like 2 or 3 ounces for the meat in the patty. Now that would be like laughable these days, right? If you got that, you would feel like you were cheated or something. Whereas today it's like double, sometimes even triple that size, which then also translates into double or triple the calories. Because if the meat is larger, then you have to make a larger bun and you have to add more sauce and maybe, a larger slice of cheese. So it all adds up. And the difference is, 257 at minimum more calories than we used to be eating without us being aware of it, right? If you order a cheeseburger, you order a cheeseburger. You're not just going to eat, like half or 2/3 of that cheeseburger just because because it seems like that one serving cheeseburger is supposed to be what you eat in one sitting. Okay. Pizza is another example. Looking at the spaghetti and meatballs, the servings that we get in restaurants these days are much larger than they used to be. You could be eating hundreds and hundreds of more calories without even, realizing it. Another example that I don't actually have on here, but that I like to highlight, I mean, we're in New Jersey, so I like talking about bagels. We're, known for our bagels. I love bagels. But if you've ever gone into your local bagel store and ordered a mini bagel, which I do, that used to be just a bagel. Okay, so in like 1990, around then, that used to be a bagel. It was about 3 inches in diameter, which is what the mini bagels are today. Today, the average bagel is about 6 inches in diameter. They've doubled in size, therefore also doubling in calories. And so I think if you walked into any bagel store and ordered a bagel and they gave you that mini size bagel, you would feel cheated. Like, this isn't a bagel. I want my big fluffy New Jersey bagel. So it's this portion distortion, this adjusted idea of what portions should look like. Okay. And we see this everywhere. So, switching gears a little bit, I wanted to talk about, cardiovascular disease and what or CVD for short. So if I say the initial CVD, that's what I'm referring to, cardiovascular disease, which is diseases of the heart and blood vessels and that affect the circulatory system. So here are just a few examples of CVD. Okay, we have high blood pressure, which is also known as hypertension, congenital heart defects, peripheral vascular disease, stroke, congestive heart failure, and coronary heart disease. Pardon me. And I want to go over some numbers, not to like scare anybody or anything like that, but just to raise awareness. This is Heart Health Month, so we are, I feel obligated to sort of share some of the information that we know to be true about heart disease in this country. Okay. So currently, heart disease is the leading cause of death for men, women, and people of most racial and ethnic groups in the US. 1 in 3 women die from cardiovascular disease each year. Every 37 seconds, one person dies from cardiovascular disease in the US. Annually, the numbers, about 647,000 Americans die from heart disease each year. It's about 1 in every 4 deaths. Also, when it comes down to it, it's an expensive problem. So heart disease costs the United States about $219 billion each year. And that was from 2014 to 15, but I'm pretty sure it hasn't improved. So that includes many things, right? It includes the cost of healthcare services, medications to treat heart disease, and also loss of productivity due to sickness or death. These all add up to the cost of the tune of $219 billion a year. All right. So now we're going to, again, switch gears a little bit to talk about our risk for heart disease. I'm going to talk about the risk factors in the next few slides. There are several. And there's basically 2 like categories of risk factors when it comes to heart disease. Most things actually, but we're talking about heart disease today. So there's the modifiable risk factors. Those are things that can be changed, okay? And then there's the fixed risk factors, which are things that you cannot change. And I'll talk about those in more detail right now. So things that you can change, okay? Diet. That is something that you have control over, that you can change, that you can modify in order to make it more of a heart healthy diet. Exercise, again, something that you have at least some control over. How frequently you exercise, to what intensity you exercise, how many minutes you exercise per session. So that is something that you can change, you can modify, you have some control over. Your weight. Now, if you have control over your diet and you have control over your how much you exercise, it's sort of logical that you also have control over your weight, right? Because we know that obesity is a risk factor for heart disease. And so if we are able to reduce our weight, that will also reduce our risk of heart disease. And other lifestyle habits, okay, which I'll talk about in a minute. The things that we cannot change. Right? We have no control over our genes, our heredity, right? Some people are just genetically at greater risk. They're predisposed to heart disease. Okay, and that's not something that we can change. We can't go in and fix our DNA or change our DNA to change our hereditary factors for or risk factors for heart disease. We also cannot have any control over our age. Time keeps ticking, and so we keep aging, so we cannot control that. We also cannot control our sex. Men are at slightly greater risk of heart disease than women. Can control our race. Also, certain races are at greater risk for heart disease. Okay, these are some of the contributing factors to heart disease. Okay, high cholesterol, hypertension, which is another word for high blood pressure, diabetes, obesity, smoking. Again, smoking is one of those lifestyle factors that we can have some control over. Excessive alcohol consumption, poor dietary choices, physical inactivity. I'm going to go back to these for a second. So you'll see, again, some of these are, a lot of these are things that we do have control over to some degree. Okay, so for example, smoking, I mentioned, right? That's something that is a risk factor. Those who smoke are at much greater risk for developing heart disease at some point in their lives. But it's something that we have control over. We can, quit. I'm not saying it's easy to do, but it's something that we can change. Okay. Excessive alcohol consumption. Now, when I say excessive, the official recommendation for when it comes to alcohol consumption is no more than 1 drink a day for women and no more than 2 for men. And when I say 1 drink, I'm not talking about, like a gigantic glass of wine or whatever your cocktail of choice is. But it's like 6 ounces of wine, one for women and two for men. And that's just because in general men tend to be physically larger than women, so they get the extra drink there. Poor dietary choices, physical inactivity. So these are all things that are modifiable that we can change. So cholesterol, talking about one of the risk factors, right? Cholesterol is something that we can have some effect over with our dietary choices. So that's why it is sort of in like one of those like modifiable risk factors. So total cholesterol is made up of 3 things, okay? So the HDL or good cholesterol, we also sometimes call this happy cholesterol because the H, that helps you remember what the HDL is versus LDL. This actually removes cholesterol from the bloodstream and artery wall. Then we have LDL, bad cholesterol, or in other words, lousy cholesterol, LDL, lousy. This deposits cholesterol in the artery wall. And triglycerides, which are stored in fat cells and used as energy in our body. So high triglycerides are often found in people who have diabetes or are overweight and obese. Okay, here's some tips to control blood cholesterol. So decrease saturated fat consumption. I will talk a little more about that in a moment. Okay, also decrease trans fat and cholesterol consumption. Increase soluble fiber. Keep a healthy weight, which again, if we're talking about our modifiable risk factors and we're talking about diet and physical activity, if we improve our diet and increase physical activity, keeping a healthy weight sort of, falls in line with that. Being physically active, decrease or quit smoking, even better. Okay, when it comes to saturated fats, I often get this, well, where do I find saturated fats? How do I reduce saturated fats? Americans, our American diet tends to be quite high in saturated fat compared to other places around the world. So these are some of the sources of saturated fats. This is not a totally exhaustive list, by the way, but these are some of the more common or popular sources of saturated fats. So beef, red meat, lamb, pork, poultry with skin. If you take the skin off, you also are removing a significant amount of the saturated fat. Lard and cream, butter, cheese, whole dairy products. Just to note, if you do opt for lower fat dairy, that can actually have a significant impact on how much saturated fat you're consuming. There is the lower fat, excuse me, excuse me a second. Sorry, thanks. The lower fat dairy options are have a significantly lower percentage of saturated fat than the regular or whole dairy products. Okay, so that includes milk, cheeses, and other dairy products as well. Fried and baked goods, so French fries, baked goods, and some plant-based oils. One question I get a lot is about coconut oil. People thinking that because this is a plant-based oil that it is a heart healthy oil, but it actually is quite high in saturated fat. So it's not considered one of the more heart healthy oils. One way you can tell is that so we find saturated fats in butter and cheese. People ask me, how do I know if it's a heart healthy fat? Saturated fat is excuse me. Saturated fat is a solid at room temperature. Okay, so if you think about a stick of butter, if you put it out on your countertop, on your kitchen counter, it's at room temperature. It stays solid. It stays in that, the stick form or whatever form it's in. As opposed to, for example, olive oil, which is a heart healthy oil that is liquid at room temperature. So that's how you can tell the saturated versus the saturated fats versus the heart healthier fats. Okay, so foods lower in saturated fat. Fruits and vegetables, whole grains, these are our plant-based foods that we always want to encourage that are a much more heart-healthy choices of nutrients than the counterparts that are higher in saturated fat. So lean meats, beans, peas, legumes, these are things that are high in protein, high in fiber, and other nutrients, and low in saturated fat. Fish and olive oil. Again, olive oil being that heart healthy oil. Again, it's liquid at room temperature, which tells you that it is a heart healthy oil, unsaturated fat. Okay. You want to decrease your trans fats and cholesterol. Okay, you can do this by checking the food label. Any foods that you buy that are, in a package, they have that little nutrition label on the back. That little tiny black and white square may look like not much, but it's actually pretty chock full of good information, good nutritional information. So if you know how to read the nutrition label, know what to look for, this can be extremely helpful in your attempts to increase or decrease, certain nutrients in your diet. So you want to check the food label. It'll tell you the amount of saturated fats and trans fats that are in any foods. And just a note, trans fats were actually banned from being added to foods several years ago. I believe it was 2015. But you can still find trans fat in certain foods because it's the byproduct of certain processes like deep frying and baking. So you may still see trans fat in things like baked goods, like so like French fries, things like that are deep fried chicken, those types of things. So when you see trans fats, that means that it's the byproduct, that it hasn't been added in, but we can still find it in smaller amounts in many foods. And also just to note that if there is less than half a gram of trans fat that's noted on the label, sorry, let me back up for a second. If it says 0 grams of trans fat on the label, that means that it has less than half a gram, because legally that what can go on the label is if there's less than half a gram of trans fat per serving in that food, then they're allowed to put 0. Okay, so just something to keep in mind. So you want to avoid fast food, fried foods, and then animal products. This is just a funny little saying that I think kind of can help make it a little lighter, but if it had a face, it has cholesterol. So that's how you know. One way you can know if your food contains dietary cholesterol. Okay. Increasing fiber. We find fiber in plant foods. Okay, so these are just some examples, and again, not an exhaustive list, but just a visual, some examples of some higher fiber foods that are heart healthy choices. So cereals, and I'm not talking about like, the sugary cereals that are, covered in, or that are maybe dyed different colors or covered in sugars or sweeteners. But there are lots of really great choices for whole grain cereals out there that are full of fiber and heart healthy choices. Whole wheat bread. This is a pretty easy switch in your diet. Like if you're used to, eating white bread, if you can switch to whole wheat bread, you can also increase your fiber intake. And just to note that you do want to see that word whole on the label when you buy bread. Sometimes it can be a little tricky. You might see a bread that is labeled multigrain. Doesn't necessarily mean that there are whole grains in there. The whole is the key word that you want to see, because that means that the whole grain has been used to make that product. And that includes the good parts of the grain that have all the fiber and other nutrients. Excuse me. And then we have our plant-based protein sources like lentils and beans, peas. Okay, these are foods that are high in protein, high in fiber, and low in saturated fat. And then, of course, our fruits and vegetables. These are a few fruits and vegetables that happen to be, higher in fiber. But really what you want to do is increase your fruits and vegetables in your diet. And that will help to guarantee that you're getting higher fiber in your diet as well. Okay, so tips to prevent or control high blood pressure now. Okay, so you want to decrease your sodium intake. Sodium is also something that we are seeing more and more of in our food, both packaged foods and also restaurant foods and fast food. We tend to consume a lot of sodium in this country. And you want to limit your alcohol, watch your weight, take your medications. If you have medication for high blood pressure, take them. And engage in more physical activity. This has a lowering effect on blood pressure after physical activity is complete. So you'll notice a trend here. We're talking about controlling cholesterol and also controlling high blood pressure. And it's a lot of the same type of advice, right? So limit your alcohol, maintain a healthy weight, increase your physical activity, right? So a lot of the same things will not only help to prevent or control your high blood pressure, but also help to address your cholesterol as well. Reducing sodium. So I know I mentioned reducing sodium. So, okay, great, but how do I do that? Well, here are some tips. Okay. You want to purchase fresh or frozen veggies. When you buy packaged veggies, when they're frozen, or you can sometimes find them in cans too, but especially frozen, it's easier to find frozen vegetables that don't have added salt. But look at the ingredients. The ingredients should have one ingredient. So if you're buying frozen peas, it should say ingredients, peas, not peas, comma, salt. Okay, so look for frozen veggies that do not have added salt as an ingredient. Okay. Consume fewer processed foods. So processed meats especially tend to be very high in sodium. So hot dogs, sausage, bacon, lunch meats, those are things that are pretty common in our diet, but also tend to be like sodium bombs and be much higher in sodium than you may realize. Okay. When you're going to flavor your food, salt is something that we tend to use a lot of, but you can also look for other sources of flavor such as herbs, spices. Okay, salt is not the only way to flavor our food. Take the salt shaker off the table, out of sight, out of mind. If it's not there, you won't use it. Eat more home cooked meals. Actually, the vast majority of the sodium that we get in our diet is from restaurant foods. So fast foods and other restaurants, not from the foods that we cook from scratch at home, that we cook at home. So if you're really looking to decrease sodium in your diet, you really want to take a look at how much you're eating out and where you're eating out, and maybe cook more at home if you can to reduce the likelihood that you're consuming more sodium than maybe you're intending to. The dietary guidelines for salt consumption, sodium consumption, sorry, is 2,400 milligrams a day. That is for healthy individuals that are not currently experiencing high blood pressure or other heart disease, or are at a greater risk for heart disease. For older adults, African Americans, people with diabetes or chronic kidney disease, the guideline is actually lower at 1,500 milligrams a day. 2,400 milligrams a day is just about a teaspoon or so of salt. 1,500 milligrams a day is about 2/3 of a teaspoon. So that's for the entire day. I know that doesn't sound like a lot. That's probably because we are just so used to the idea of consuming so much more than that. But the flip side of that is that if you just reduce your salt consumption by a quarter of a teaspoon or half a teaspoon or a third of a teaspoon, that can actually have a significant impact. Okay, so it's continuing to talk about sodium. These are just some common foods that you might want to look out for when either in restaurants or home, even in the grocery store. Some of these might be higher in sodium than you might realize. So if you can just be aware, and if there's any way to reduce any of these things in your diet, then the likelihood is you'll also be reducing the amount of sodium that you're consuming. And I can actually send, Rachel, I don't know if you may be able to email the attendees, but I can send these out in an email. I'm not expecting you to memorize all these, but just to raise your awareness for now. So I'm looking at the infographic on the right-hand side, the Salty 6, right? So breads and rolls tend to be, higher in sodium. Cold cuts and cured meats. I did talk about processed meats a few minutes ago. But pizza also. So with pizza, you're looking at bread, so which we just learned maybe now for the first time tends to be higher in sodium, and then cheese, which also often is high in sodium. And then if you're adding any like processed meats on top, like pepperoni or sausage, all the things that are, maybe we love and are delicious, not going to deny that. But that also adding additional sodium onto there as well. So pizza can also be a surprise salty food. Poultry, and this is, I'm not talking about just a plain like grilled chicken or something, but poultry that is prepared. Okay, like for example, like the roasted chickens or something like that. The seasoning that it comes with is often very high in sodium. Canned soups also can be very high in sodium. It is possible to get lower sodium versions, but you really need to know how to read the label and know where to find the sodium numbers in there. So to make sure that you're getting the lower sodium varieties. And also just another note, I talked about the differences in like lower fat dairy compared to whole dairy before. And how the lower fat dairy is significantly lower in saturated fat. Same with sodium. The foods that are labeled as low sodium are significantly lower in sodium. It's not just where it's like a teeny little bit. There are actually rules for what is allowed to be labeled as lower sodium. And so it has to have 5 grams or less of sodium per serving for it to be labeled low sodium. So this is something that you want to look out for as well. And finally, sandwiches. I mean, this is basically a combination of some of the foods we talked about earlier. So breads, processed meats, cheeses, these all add up to, to result in a meal that can be maybe much higher in sodium than you realized. Okay, again, how to reduce your risk for diabetes, obesity, and therefore for heart disease as well. The nutrition facts label, it is your friend. If you know how to read the nutrition facts label, it might take a little practice at first. It might be a little, frustrating to look for all these numbers and understand what they mean. But once you get used to it, a quick glance can really make a big difference in your understanding of what it is that you're actually buying and then eating as well. Okay, so you want to look for the serving size first, right? So serving sizes can vary a lot. So you want to know if the information on the nutrition label is referring to like the entire package of something that you're buying, or maybe just a small portion. Because if it's a small portion, like let's say there are 10 servings per package, then the calories you'd have to multiply by 10 to understand what's in that entire package. Okay, soda is a good example. So very often like a 20 ounce of soda, that's considered 2.5 servings. So if you look at the calories at a quick glance on the one side of the nutrition facts label, that's not going to be the entire number of calories in the soda bottle. It's going to be 2.5 times that. Okay, so learning how to read the nutrition facts label will really help you to understand how much saturated fat is in food, sodium, calories, etc. I mentioned portion distortion before, just this idea that we are consuming more than we realize we are or that we intend to be. And so just using smaller plates and bowls, I know it sounds like maybe a little bit silly, but that actually can help us to reduce our portion sizes as well. Because psychologically, if you have like a large plate, you're going to fill that up. I actually did buy smaller bowls for our family a few years ago. Because we had these like gigantic bowls. My kids were filling them up to the brim and then they were not eating, little kids, they don't have huge appetites. So they would, half of it would go to waste. So I was like, all right, that's it. I'm buying smaller bowls, but it also helps to just, control the portion sizes for other reasons as well. Be physically active. Now, I want to just, make a note that this doesn't mean that you have to go and start training for a marathon. I'm not saying you have to all become like these, incredible athletes or anything like that. And I'm saying that because I know physical activity can be intimidating for some people, especially if you are someone who has not historically been very active before. It can feel like, well, where do I even begin? What do I do? I'm not someone who's physically active. We can kind of get these ideas about ourselves, and that can be a barrier. That can be something that prevents us from actually engaging in something that can be beneficial to our health. So I just have this funny picture of, somebody, walking their dog from the car, just to kind of make a funny point. Like, don't be that guy. Don't be this person, actually get up and walk and move. Every minute counts. So even going for a 10 or, 15-minute walk, if you do 15-minute walk twice a day, there's your 30 minutes of physical activity. You don't have to go for a sprint that's going to like make you completely breathless. Walking is a great, great activity. I know it's a little hard this time of year when it's dark and cold. Maybe it's still icy in some places. But even, walking up your stairs a few times can add up to your physical activity minutes. Just move more. Okay. You want to look for 30 to 45 minutes a day of moderate to intense activity. If you are someone who doesn't know where to start or who hasn't been physically active yourself, you should consult with your doctor before engaging in any physical activity, just to be sure that you are starting off at like a safe level for yourself. Okay. These are just some questions, some things I'm going to list to help you rate your own risk. This is not meant to make any medical diagnoses or anything like that, but it's just some things you can kind of look at to understand if you have any risk factors for heart disease. So do you smoke? Is your blood pressure higher than 140/90? Or have you been told by your doctor that you have high blood pressure? Okay, has your doctor told you that your LDL or lousy or bad cholesterol is too high? Your total cholesterol is 200 or higher, or that your HDL or good cholesterol is less than 40? Okay, has a family member had a heart attack before age 55, or sorry, a father or brother had a heart attack before age 55, or mother or sister had one before age 65? And this is looking at our genetic risk. Do you have diabetes or a fasting blood sugar of 126 or higher? Do you need medication to control your blood sugar? For women, are you 55? Are you over 55 years old? For men, are you over 45 years old? Do you have a body mass index also, or BMI of 25 or more? Do you get less than 30 minutes of physical activity most days? Okay. Has your doctor told you that you have angina, or have you had a heart attack in the past? And these are some things that you can ask your doctor next time you go for a visit to get a sense of your own heart health. Okay, so what is my risk for heart disease? And I'm telling you these things because very often when we get into the doctor's office, we sometimes just don't know what to ask, right? So this can help you. You can even write these down. These are things that can help you to talk to your doctor openly about your heart health. Okay. What is my blood pressure, and what does it mean? Part of your doctor's, your healthcare provider's job, excuse me, is to educate you. Okay, not just to do an exam and then walk out. You should feel that sense of responsibility for yourself, and that the sense of deservedness for yourself, that you should get all the information that you need. You should not be walking out of your doctor's office confused about anything or not sure about anything. Well, he said that, or she said that. I don't know what that means. Or, she told me that my blood pressure is high, but I should have, I didn't ask any more questions. Make sure that while you're in there, you make the best use of that time, ask questions. If you are confused, that is not your fault. That is your healthcare provider's fault. They should be explaining things in a way that makes sense to you and that helps you understand. What are my cholesterol numbers and what do they mean? What's my blood sugar level, and does it mean that I'm at risk for diabetes? What other screenings or tests do I need to make sure my heart is healthy? And what should a heart healthy plan look like for me? Because it will look different for everybody depending on a number of things. How can I tell if I'm having a heart attack? We don't want to get to that point, but it is important to understand the symptoms if it does happen. Okay. So we have plenty of time for questions, if anybody does have any questions for me.
Thank you so much, Jen. I really appreciate this presentation. I think it was full of so many important facts and information to really help us learn how to truly keep our hearts healthy. You hear a lot of presentations about just do this, do that, but that was really informative, and I think everybody probably got a lot out of it. So before we move on to questions, I'm going